The afternoon sun slammed down on the Santa Barbara limestone at 2 p.m., turning the construction dust into a choking haze that scraped the back of my throat. I dragged the collar of my gray t-shirt across my forehead, feeling grit sting my skin, and squinted at the topographical blueprints snapping in the coastal wind on the hood of my truck. The load calculations for the main pavilion of the charity gala were off. The slope of the soil was 3 degrees too steep, and the temporary footings were already sinking into the sandy loam. I was figuring out the torque needed to drive the helical piers deeper into the bedrock when a sudden flash of primary colors caught my eye. I froze, the steel soil probe still in my hand. The normally chaotic estate courtyard, clogged with panicked vendors and forklift fumes, went quiet. Eleanor West stood under the century-old olive trees I had spent 3 weeks restoring. Gone was her usual armor of sharp, tailored blazers for negotiating with difficult contractors. Instead, she wore a red and blue superhero costume, built for the children's interactive zone, crafted from durable fabric meant for climbing walls and sun-soaked hours. A stark white spider emblem stretched across her chest, gleaming in the harsh sunlight. Her hands rested on her hips, posture firm and grounded, looking entirely out of place against the rustic stonework, yet owning the space completely. I felt the soil probe grow heavy in my grip. She held my gaze, a defiant curve to her lips, and leaned slightly forward over the dusty paving stones. "I'm wearing the suit you approved," she said. My brain scrambled, still raw from a 60-hour week. 3 days ago, during a chaotic production meeting, she had shown me sketches for the children's superhero zone. I tapped one design, noting the reinforced stitching would survive the climbing walls better than the cheap foam armor the vendor suggested. I hadn't realized she intended to test it herself. "It's very visible," I rasped, driving the soil probe into the dirt near my boot to force my focus away from the vulnerability in her expression. "The kids won't lose me in the crowd," she said, her playful tone snapping into clipped efficiency. "Lorenzo took the deposit, gave us only this prototype, and now he's withholding the staging equipment, even with the signed escrow from Tuesday." She stepped closer, the olive tree shadow crossing her face. "He wants a higher base rate before he releases anything else." "Show me the escrow," I said. She didn't flinch. That alone told me this was serious. Eleanor pulled a leather portfolio from under her arm, handing me a neat stack of papers. The top sheet was the signed escrow authorization, dated Tuesday at 9:14 a.m. Beneath it lay Lorenzo's revised invoice, with a handwritten surcharge stuffed into the staging line, and a courier receipt showing the prototype had been delivered while the rest never left the warehouse. I set the soil probe against the truck, flipped the pages, and snapped 2 photos with my phone. "He tried moving the dispute out of email," I said, glancing at the receipt. "That means he knows the paper trails against him." "I also have the warehouse texts," Eleanor added, unlocking her phone and holding it where I could read. Lorenzo's dispatcher had confirmed inventory Monday, then vanished once the new rate sheet appeared. "Good," I said. "Don't print all of it. Keep the signed release, revised invoice, courier receipt, and texts together. If he claims a misunderstanding, lay out the dates, one by one, and let him drown in his own paperwork." Her shoulders eased slightly. Relief in a plan is lighter than fear. I looked past her to the main lawn, where Lorenzo's crew was supposed to install the interlocking deck for the main tent. The ground was bare, soft, vulnerable to coastal moisture. He was using the costumes to push a new contract. If the main deck wasn't done by tomorrow, we couldn't install the fencing or heavy botanical displays. The whole charity gala, designed to fund pediatric mobility equipment, would collapse. I had 48 hours to replace him or make him honor his signed papers. Eleanor rubbed her temple, a nervous habit I'd noticed the first day we mapped the site. She straightened, gesturing to my blueprints. "You look like you're about to tear a hole in that schematic." "Tell me my day isn't getting worse, Carter." "The ground under the main pavilion is too soft," I said, pointing at the gradient lines. Lorenzo's crew hadn't compacted the subbase. "Put a 10-ton 10 on it and the south corner sinks 6 inches the second it rains. It's a structural hazard." Eleanor stared at the plans, jaw tightening under the weight of responsibility. At 34, she usually cleared rooms with her competence. Now, she just looked exhausted. "I'll call the foundation," she said softly, voice stripped of command. "Tell ISA we have to delay. We'll lose the venue deposit, but I can't risk a safety fail." "No," I said before I thought. I rolled up the blueprint, shoving it into the PVC tube in my truck bed. "You fight Lorenzo on the paperwork. Secure the costumes. I'll fix the ground." Her eyes narrowed at the spider emblem on her chest. "Carter, you're the landscape architect. You design flora and hardscape, not foundations. That's heavy machinery, outside your scope." "My scope is making sure this site doesn't fail," I said, pulling my leather work gloves from my pocket. "I've got 6 crew members, a skid steer, and 3 pallets of crushed granite meant for decorative paths. We can repurpose the granite, pack it, wet it, and roll it. It'll hold the pavilion." I didn't mention the double shift or the cost I'd eat. Logistics nightmare, but a clean solution. "I can't approve the overtime," she said, pride flaring. "I'll pay for the granite and the crew's overtime directly," she said. "You don't take the hit for Lorenzo's mess." I met her eyes. The fierce independence was a wall I respected too much to argue. "Deal. You handle the suits and the paperwork. I'll take care of the ground." For the next 10 hours, the estate was a whirlwind of noise and diesel fumes. I climbed into the cab of the skid steer, the engine's familiar vibrations grounding me. We ripped out the loose, improperly graded soil Lorenzo had left behind, the bucket biting deep into the earth. The sun sank behind the Pacific, painting the sky a bruised purple, and the coastal fog rolled in, dropping the temperature by 15 degrees. I communicated with my crew using hand signals over the roar of the machinery. We laid the geotextile fabric, spread the crushed granite, and ran the heavy drum roller over the surface until it was solid. It was nearly midnight when I finally killed the roller's engine. The silence that returned to the courtyard felt almost deafening. I climbed down, muscles screaming from hours of work. The new foundation pad was perfectly level, a gray expanse of packed stone ready to support the pavilion. I walked to the makeshift command center, a folding table under the patio heaters. Eleanor was still there. She had changed out of her costume hours ago, now in a heavy wool sweater and jeans, hair tied in a messy knot. Highlighters, contracts, and an open laptop surrounded her. Her reading glasses were perched on her head. I walked over, boots crunching on the gravel. Without a word, I pulled a thermos from the insulated cooler I'd dragged from my truck. I poured a measure into the metal cap and set it on the table near her elbow. She jumped slightly. "What's this?" "Peppermint tea," I said, leaning against a stone pillar. "You said yesterday coffee after 4 p.m. makes your heart race." She stared at the cup, shoulders easing a fraction. A small gesture, but in the middle of a crisis, it felt weighty. She picked it up, letting the warmth seep into her hands, and took a slow sip. "Thank you," she breathed out, a shaky exhale carrying the day's tension. I got Lorenzo on the phone, cited specific breach of contract clauses, recorded the call with his consent, and told him the foundation's legal team would file a lien against his business license by 9 a.m. He folded. Staging equipment and costumes would arrive tomorrow at noon. "Good," I said softly in the dark. I looked at the exhaustion etched under her eyes, the tension in her posture. I knew that exhaustion well, the need to never let a ball drop. "You should go home, Eleanor. The ground is stable. We can build tomorrow." "I can't," she said, eyes fixed on her laptop. The foundation director had called. ISA was moving the timeline. A major donor was arriving a day early. The gala wasn't Saturday anymore, it was Friday. Tomorrow. The air seemed thinner. Tomorrow. We had lost 24 hours. If the pavilion wasn't ready for the walkthrough at 5 p.m., we'd lose the funding. "I've spent 8 months planning this," she admitted, voice breaking. "I thought if I controlled every variable, checked every spreadsheet, but I can't control the ground, and I can't control a shady contractor." Her eyes held stark vulnerability. I'm terrified I'm going to fail these kids, Carter. I didn't offer empty reassurances. I stepped closer, exactly 2 feet away, hands at my sides, fists clenched lightly to resist the urge to pull her into my jacket. We have 17 hours, I said, calm and steady. My crew is back at 6 a.m. Lorenzo's trucks arrive at noon. That leaves 5 hours to erect the steel frame, run the lighting trusses, and secure the canopy. It's tight, but it's possible. I'll oversee the structural rigging myself. I grabbed a carpentry pencil and the back of a delivery manifest and broke the problem into pieces: frame erection, lighting trusses, DA ramp clearance, generator load. I circled the critical path and handed the page to her. If EA asks what changed, tell her this, I said. We cut decorative work before safety, pavilion first, wheelchair route second, everything else after. She read it. You did that in 30 seconds. I've rebuilt retaining walls with less time than this. I folded the manifest and placed it next to her laptop. Get 2 hours of sleep. When you come back, bring printed copies of every addendum and receipt. If Lorenzo tries to grandstand in front of the board, I want paper in your hand before he opens his mouth. Some tension left her face. A plan with teeth replaced hope. Her eyes lifted to mine, and the strain eased as she mirrored the calm I forced into my own posture. You don't have to handle the rigging. You're the landscape architect. I'm the guy making sure this site doesn't fail, I repeated. Go to sleep, Eleanor. I'll watch the site. She didn't argue. She packed her laptop slowly, her movements heavy. As she passed me toward her car, her shoulder brushed mine, not lingering, but steady. The tremor in her hands had stopped. The next morning, the estate was a controlled chaos. Fog burned off early, leaving the grounds exposed to the rising heat. Lorenzo's trucks rolled in late, their air brakes hissing as they backed onto the compacted granite foundation. Lorenzo stepped out, a man more comfortable yelling than measuring. He frowned at the solid ground, realizing his leverage was gone. Drop the steel, Lorenzo, Eleanor called from the staging tent. She was back in her professional armor, a navy blazer, clipboard in hand, and her voice cut cleanly through the diesel noise. You have exactly 2 hours to assemble the main frame before the lighting crew needs the airspace. Before the first truss even left the truck, I walked the granite pad with a laser level and a thermos in hand, marking 3 soft spots with bright orange paint and ordering one last pass with the roller. I checked the temporary power station and discovered Lorenzo's crew had planned to overload a feeder with lighting, catering warmers, and the pediatric charging bank. I split the circuits on paper, labeled the runs with black tape, and clipped the corrected diagram to the generator cage. At 10:42, the foundation board members arrived through the side gate. Lorenzo saw them and tried to hide behind his crew, but I let him flounder. He threw his hands toward the half-built pavilion. Stylist, this is what happens when a plant guy decides he's a structural engineer, he barked, loud enough for the volunteers to hear. I let him finish. Then I placed my compaction readings next to the signed staging agreement, the escrow release, and the revised invoice with his handwritten search charge. The subbase failed because your crew skipped compaction logs, I said, tapping each document. Here are the missed logs. Here's your signed scope. Here's the unauthorized charge. And here's the corrected load schedule the fire marshal will see if you want to keep arguing. The board stopped walking. Eleanor leaned in, voice clear and public. Please note that Carter Thomas provided the corrective engineering plan and documented safety compliance Lorenzo failed to produce. With the audience watching, Lorenzo stepped back. Sneering, he directed his crew to unload the massive steel trusses. I monitored the perimeter, checking tension lines on the mature oaks used as secondary anchors. The crew moved fast, too fast, skipping the secondary locking pins on the base plates and relying only on gravity and primary bolts. Hold up! I shouted, walking onto the deck. I didn't yell, I lowered my voice into a sharp bark that cut through the clatter of metal. I pointed at the corner stanchion. You skipped the shear pins on the base flange. If the coastal wind hits 20 knots, that truss will twist and snap the main bolt. Lorenzo's face flushed. I've been building stages for 20 years, kid. Gravity holds it. The pins are redundant. The pins are code, I said, ignoring him. I pulled a torque wrench from my belt, knelt by the base plate, and slid the heavy steel pin into the alignment hole. I locked the wrench and pulled hard, the calibrated click echoing across the deck. I stood and handed him the tool. 50 pounds of torque on every base plate. Lorenzo, or I call the fire marshal and have this site condemned for structural negligence. He stared at me, then the wrench, then Eleanor, who stood arms crossed, expression unreadable but completely supportive. Lorenzo snatched the wrench and barked at his crew to go back and pin the bases. I stepped off the deck, wiping grease from my hands. Across the distance, Eleanor and I exchanged a quiet, mutual respect. By 3 p.m., the pavilion frame was up, the heavy canvas canopy secured, and the lighting crew running cables. The kids' interactive zone was ready. Eleanor directed volunteers with precise, frantic energy. I was checking the perimeter lighting when a sharp crack made me spin around. On the main stage, a massive lighting truss hung at a terrifying angle, suspended 15 feet in the air by a slipping chain hoist. Lorenzo's crew had miscalculated the load balance on the motor. If it fell, it would crush the podium and tear through the deck. Lorenzo yelled into a radio, helpless. Eleanor sprinted across the lawn, pale-faced. I dropped my clipboard and ran. Ignoring liability, I sprinted up the stage stairs, bypassing Lorenzo. Clear the deck! I roared. Volunteers scattered. At the base, the electronic override was jammed. The chain gave another agonizing lurch. I didn't have time to fix it. I grabbed a carabiner and high-tensile rope from my harness and scaled the scaffolding, boots finding the rungs by muscle memory. Reaching the crossbar, heat from the halogen lights burning the back of my neck, I threw the rope over the primary I-beam and clipped the carabiner to the slipping truss, bypassing the motor entirely. Brace it! I shouted. I wrapped the slack around the upright, the rope catching the truss as it dropped another 2 inches, then stopping. Tension screamed through my shoulders, but the truss held. Below, Lorenzo's crew rushed in with secondary chains. Once secured, I slowly released the rope, arms trembling from the adrenaline. I climbed down, boots thudding on the deck. Silence fell. Lorenzo wouldn't meet my eyes. Eleanor stood 5 feet away, hands over her mouth. She lowered them and stepped toward me. "You're bleeding," she said softly. I looked at my palm. The rope had burned through my glove, leaving a red line. Surface burn. "I'm fine. The load is secure." "Lorenzo is off the site," Eleanor said, voice cold. "Your crew is done. Leave the equipment. The foundation lawyers will contact you Monday regarding the safety violations." For once, Lorenzo didn't argue. He signaled to his crew, and they packed up and left. The walkthrough was set for 5 p.m. The foundation director, Isla, arrived in a sleek black town car, moving across the estate with a critical, measured eye. The pavilion was standing solid. The lighting was perfect. The interactive zones were safe, colorful, and inviting. I stayed by the perimeter fence, leaning against my truck, covered in dirt, sweat, and grease. My place was in the background. ISA stopped near the main stage, turning toward Eleanor. "It's a miracle you got this done a day early, Eleanor. The staging is flawless," she said. Eleanor didn't take the praise for herself. Instead, she scanned the crowd until she spotted me by the trucks. Then she pointed and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't pull it off alone. Carter Thomas engineered the foundation overnight when the contractor failed, and he secured the overhead rigging this afternoon. He saved the event. ISA, his firm is the reason we're standing here today." The public acknowledgement hit harder than the last 2 days of physical labor. She didn't hide my contribution. She made sure I was seen. By 7 p.m., the gala had begun. The estate glowed with lights, soft music floated through the air, and children ran across the perfectly level lawns. I stayed near the perimeter, checking generator loads and ground stability. It was my responsibility to ensure the site's integrity, though my eyes kept finding Eleanor. She was back in the Spider-Man suit, surrounded by a dozen kids in wheelchairs and braces, laughing, posing for photos, her energy endless. At 8:15, a pediatric equipment rep came rushing over. "We have a problem," he said. "The East Bank trips every time 2 chairs charge simultaneously." I followed him to the lawn and opened the weatherproof panel. Lorenzo's crew had ignored my taped load split and tied the charging bank into the decorative lighting circuit. I shut the branch breaker, rerouted the charger bank to the dedicated feeder I had already staged, and swapped one undersized connector with a spare cam lock from my truck. For minutes later, the hub hummed steadily and the perimeter lights didn't flicker. The rep exhaled. "You just saved us from shutting down that section." Eleanor was beside me, her eyes scanning the powered hub and feeder labels. "You planned for this too?" "I planned for Lorenzo not following instructions," I said. For a moment, in the middle of lights, music, and donors, she looked at me the way you look at a wall that has already withstood a storm. Safe. Around 10 p.m., the gala began winding down. The kids were leaving. Music faded to a soft instrumental track. I packed tools into the truck bed, metal clanking in the quiet night. "You're leaving," she said. I turned. Eleanor was walking toward me, a heavy wool coat over her suit to fight the coastal chill. Exhaustion was back in her eyes, but now it felt lighter, like fatigue after a win. "My job is done," I said, sliding the heavy toolbox into place. "The site is secure." "I thought you were leaving for good," she said, stopping a few feet away. "Lorenzo said you had a contract in San Diego starting Monday." I frowned, wiping my hands on a rag. "Lorenzo talks too much. I turned that job down yesterday. I'm staying local." The coastal wind caught a strand of her hair as she looked at me. "Why?" I watched her standing in the dark driveway, still in her bright suit beneath the coat. I thought of the distance I'd kept, the discipline not to touch her. I tossed the rag into the truck bed and took a step forward, breaking the safe boundary I'd maintained for 2 weeks. "Because I'm tired of building temporary things," I said, voice low, stripped of any professional filter. I looked down at her, forcing her to tilt her head up. "I build pavilions that get torn down in 3 days. I plant gardens people never walk in. I want to build something that lasts." She didn't step back. She held her ground, eyes reflecting the amber glow of the perimeter lamps. She reached out and lightly touched the raw rope burn on my palm. It wasn't lingering or exploratory, just grounding, a transfer of steadiness. "I'm wearing the outfit," she whispered, echoing the first day. I didn't smile. The gravity of the moment settled over me. I reached up, hovering briefly before cupping the side of her face. My thumb rested against her jaw for one measured second, calm, deliberate. I leaned down and kissed her, soft and intentional, a promise sealed without words. The chaos of the last 2 weeks, the noise, deadlines, failing steel, vanished. It felt like dropping an anchor into deep water. Permanent. When I pulled back, she kept her hand over mine, eyes closed for a second of relief. "We need to strike the tents by Sunday," I said softly, returning to practical reality. She opened her eyes, smiling genuinely for the first time that night. "I'll handle the logistics. You handle the ground." I learned then that true integrity isn't just working hard when others are watching. It's building a safe foundation in the dark so the people you care about can stand securely in the light. Real love isn't about rescuing someone, it's about holding the line together. Please like and subscribe to share more stories like this.